Hello everybody, welcome to our very first Bloomburrow set review. Today we are going to be going over just the introduction to this wonderful new set, Bloomburrow, full of animals and excitement. I'm super excited about it. We've got Yanks on the call today. Like I said, we're going to be going over the new mechanics, returning mechanics, and all of the draftable archetypes for your draft and sealed decks. How you doing, Yanks?
Good. We're usually, I think, for most part, kind of on a similar level on how excited we are for sets. Like, I might have been more excited for the Brothers War because I love all the backstory. This is definitely the one you're way more excited for than I am. Probably
Everything
more
is
excited than anybody.
Everything is so freaking cute. I never want to leave. So yes, I'm very, very excited. So let's go ahead and start just with the new mechanics, because I know that's the thing that most people are the most excited for. And then you guys can quit watching if you're not interested in the rest. But there are some pretty interesting new mechanics. The first one we're going to take a look at is gift. Now, this one says gift a card. Again, we're not going to review these cards because we will be doing that in the next couple of episodes. We will go over every single card and rate them for limited, but now we're just going to talk about this gift mechanic. So this one says gift a card. You may promise an opponent a gift as you cast this spell. If you do, they draw a card before its other effects. So Yanks, you want to tell us a little bit about what this means as far as the timing of when these things resolve, because I know instants and sorceries and creatures are a little bit different on resolution, and then we'll go over what types of things you can gift.
Sure. So, gift is like a lot of other mechanics. It's an additional cost to cast the spell. So, think like Kicker, for example. When you cast the spell, put it on the stack, you decide to pay the gift cost. In this case, you're promising an opponent a gift of a card. If it's an instant or sorcery, as it says on Long River's pull here, when the spell resolves, the first thing that happens is the gift resolves. So in this case, before here it's counter target creature spell. Before that happens, they get the card. If it's and that's the same for all instants and sorceries. For all permanents, so enchantments, creatures, artifacts, etc., the gift, you still pay it as an additional cost, but it doesn't actually take effect until the permanent resolves onto the battlefield, and then it is an enter the battlefield trigger of that permanent. So if you have, say, a 2/2 creature that has a gift a card, if you choose to gift it as part of the additional cost, when the spell resolves, your 2/2 creature will hit the battlefield, and then a triggered ability will go on the stack, gifting the opponent the card.
It's interesting that the cost of the gifting is at the same place in the spell. However, the resolution of it does change, whether it's a instant or sorcery or creature. So that does give some weird information and timing situations. I wish that the resolution was the consistent part. I think that would help me a bunch. But either way, it's a pretty cool new mechanic, and it's good for like group hug things for people who are playing Commander. But in limited, I think it's a neat, interesting way to sort of balance and make cards more unique. The types of things that you can gift here: cards, creatures, treasures. I've seen, I think, like 1/1s and stuff. Is there anything else I'm missing there that you can think of off the top of your head?
So there are four total gifts that you can give in the set.
There you go.
I believe you said which one's card.
I've seen tokens like 1/1 fishes and stuff. And I
Yep.
think I've seen a treasure token.
Yep. So there's cards. The only token is fish. Is the only one you can
Oh,
give in the
okay.
set. Treasure and food are the four things you can give.
Okay.
There are also two more in the commander set. There's an octopus and an extra turn.
Yeah, tell me about it. That stupid octopus killed me. Anyway, a pretty interesting mechanic overall. What do you think, Yanks? Are you pro gift or boo gift?
I like the fact that they're experimenting with the what seems like a cool mechanic for multiplayer, so mostly commander in this case, that doesn't seem to be completely broken in single player, like Monarch or the Initiative can be. Like this functions fairly well in one-on-one, I would imagine.
It's sort of like the removal spells that, like, it's cheap white removal, but it gives your opponent 2 map tokens, right? Like, so it's a
Yep.
way to give high powered ability cards a balancing mechanism. So I think that you're right. This does translate well to multiplayer, but it plays a lot more like what the Get Lost or whatever that card
Get
is,
lost. Yep.
where that's not a good commander card at all, right? Like that is a powerful card for 1v1. So this translates well to both. And that's why I'm very pro the gifting mechanic.
I'd like to just add one more rules note on gift that's a little counterintuitive, is because even though the gift is a cost, so when you think of spells that have additional costs, like things that require you to like
Sacrifice.
discard a card, or sacrifice a permanent or something, if the spell gets countered or doesn't resolve, that's already happened, right? That cost, you don't get that card back. In this case, that gift never happens if the spell is countered, even though it's an additional cost.
I don't like the way that they did that. They made that extra difficult. So, but even though it's an additional cost, it is something that happens upon resolution of the spell.
Exactly.
So that it feels like it is unnecessarily complicated, but the only way you could do it for instants and sorceries and creatures would be to format them differently, and I could see why they wouldn't want to go through the trouble of doing that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Next up, we have Offspring. So this is a bonus cost that you can spend. It depends. The cost is different depending. I've seen colorless, I've seen one black like we're looking at here, and it just makes it so that way when the creature comes into play, you're getting an additional copy of that creature that's a 1/1. So you're basically getting extra ETBs. There are things that care about having multiple bodies. There are things that care about specifically having 1/1s. So the Offspring cost is just a way for your creatures to go nice and wide. Now, it's a bit interesting because I would expect to see that the creatures were a little weaker overall, but I don't know if that's going to be the case because, that power creep.
Yeah, the interesting parts on this card is that as a token copy of the card itself, like any enter the battlefield effects that the card has, you'll get twice, basically, once for it and once for its copy. The token copy will have the same mana value. It's not just a 0 mana like some tokens are.
Yeah, because anytime it's a copy, you have the same mana cost. So things that have like destroy things with like 3 CMC or higher or whatever will hit those copies.
Yep. I just thought of this, and it's not in this set as far as I know, but it would be kind of cool if at some point we see Offspring and the cost is gift a card or something. You could stack nestle abilities.
Yeah, that seems unnecessarily complicated. I hope we don't
agreed.
See it. But I think I have seen... I think I might have seen a stack, actually, now that I think about it. But we'll get to it, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, Offspring, I think I played this in the Commander games for Decked Out, and one of the decks is completely based on this as the main mechanic. So, it cared a lot about 1/1s and stuff. So I expect it to be a pretty powerful archetype overall, or mechanic here in the limited environment. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Valiant. This one has both, actually, Offspring and Valiant, which is really cute. So you can make a second copy of it, and then Valiant says, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or an ability, which is very similar to his Heroic, which we saw back like in Anthros. For those of you guys who are, old like me, the only difference being that this one actually can still be targeted by an ability, not just an instant or sorcery. So if you have a card that says like, tap, give a creature +1/+0 or something like that, then that would trigger this. Now the ability that you're getting for the Valiant trigger changes depending on the creature. They have a lot of flexibility in the build there, but the main premise is that you are targeting it with a spell or ability to activate some sort of bonus.
Yep, and the one other key difference between Valiant and Heroic is that Heroic could happen as many times as you wanted. Valiant can only happen once each turn.
Yes. At first, I thought you were going to say it the other way around. I was like, I heroic'd a bunch. What are you talking about? But no, you're right. I actually forgot because, you reading the whole card is not super relevant. But I will say a lot of those cards have Offspring attached to them, so they sort of benefit each other. So you can target one and then target the other, and then you get to keep doing it, right?
Yeah, and you can see exactly how that would work with this card, right? Like you make Offspring to get an extra mouse, and then the Valiant ability gives all mice +1/+0. Great.
Oh, they're so cute. Oh my god, I'm gonna die. I never want to leave this set ever. Okay, the next one up is the Paw Print. This is a mythic cycle, so you guys won't see this very often. But this is a cycle of season cards, and the way they work is you can choose up to 5 paw prints worth of abilities. So it's interesting. You can get 5 rabbits, you can get, 3 rabbits, and exile a non-land permanent. Its controller draws a card. I don't think that this had like an official name. It was just like the paw print season cycle or something. But it's something to be aware of that is a neat thing that they are trying to play around with. Resource management.
Yeah, in the release notes, they are just calling it paw prints, but I do kind of like one of the notes in here where it just says the paw print symbol does not represent a cost, mana, counters, or any kind of persistent resource. You can't save up paw print symbols, mostly because there isn't anything to save up. They're just paw prints.
I would love to see it be like another energy where like you could like earn paw prints.
Yeah,
I just want to
I mean,
stay in Bloomburrow forever, okay? Can we just have a
it's
couple of expansions?
the short version for the paw prints is it's just another modal spell. This is just a way of determining what modes you get.
But cuter.
Yeah, but Adam, yeah, Bloomburrow themed.
All right, next up we have forage. Forage is when you do a thing, you get to forage, whether that's play a creature or some spells, something along those lines. You get to exile 3 cards from your graveyard, and then if you do, you get something extra. So for this one, exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food specifically. I don't know how many foods there are going to be, but I assume it's a decent amount. But I had one where it was like forage, make a food for each time you did it. It was like multiple triggers. You could forage as often as you wanted with it, like chain them, if that makes sense. This one is just one time, so you just get to do the bonus. And when you do, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So it doesn't let you do it over and over again, but there are cards that will allow you to do that, so it's important to note.
Forage can be, in this case, like an enter battlefield trigger. It's also can be an additional cost. There's a removal spell that like you have an additional cost, either pay extra mana or forage. So it's just basically another resource, another ability that uses different resources than mana sometimes.
We just saw something similar with like collect evidence where it cared about the CMC of your cards and you were getting huge benefits for having larger spells in your graveyard, whereas this is going to give you larger benefits for having more cards in your graveyard, maybe making like some self-mill mechanics a little bit more relevant because you're actually going to get a lot more from those cards. But we'll have to see how relevant that is as we get through the set review.
What was the one we saw in Lost Caverns of Ixalan? Was it like adapt or craft? That also you could take stuff out of the graveyard.
Craft? No, not metal craft, no. But yes, I think it was something like that.
Yeah. So they've been doing this recently, where like using your graveyard is a different type of resource.
Yeah. And that's always been the case, and it's just been very recently that they've started to play around with what that can mean and how you can do that in different ways to make it unique. And I like this, especially my Golgari Squirrel deck for the Commander game had a lot of forage in it, and the idea that the squirrels are foraging for like resources brings me much joy.
It's a very on theme word.
Yes. So fun way to get a little extra out of your graveyard. The final new mechanic is expend, which basically just means whenever you spend X mana in a turn, you get the ability. So we saw this in the Commander game as well. This particular one says whenever you expend 4, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So it's 4 total mana to cast spells during your turn.
It is the first time you hit that 4th mana. So if you hit 8 mana, it doesn't trigger again. It just triggers once on that number. And weirdly, it kind of makes sense, but it wasn't intuitive to me that it counts cards count mana you've already spent, even if they weren't on the battlefield at the time. So, for example, there's a 5-drop in the set that has expend 4. Casting it alone, it cannot get triggered that turn because you've already spent past 4 before it enters the battlefield.
That's what I was going to try to clarify on. But if it had expend 4 and it costs 3, then you could play it and then cast something else and still get the trigger. So yes, that's the part I was going to like butt in, but you ended up looping it around on me in time. It is a strange mechanic to keep up on. I think Arena will do a lovely job of handling that for us. And I do think that the situation that you lined out where it has expend 4, you cast it and people will try to get that trigger, or they'll like cast one more and be like, I've already spent 4, so it wins. But that is going to be not the case. I think this will be the premium candidate for misplays.
Yes, I do. I kind of like the way they're doing it because I like that you're not having to keep track of different mana totals for each permanent that comes into the battlefield that turn with expend.
The other thing that worries me a little bit is the wording here. Your fourth total mana. The word total there makes me think like it has to end at that number. Like, does that make
Oh
sense?
yes, yep, yep,
So I can see a lot of people sort of making that mistake as well. Like you have this in play, you play a 5-drop, you didn't play 4 total, you played 5. So does this trigger? Like we know
yes,
the answer to that, but
yeah,
I can see it being a little bit fuzzy.
yeah. I think it also gets a little bit weird, or at least you have to remember how it works with cost increases or decreases to cards. It's not looking at the mana value of the card; it's looking at actual mana you spend. So if a
Yes.
cost is reduced, like a leyline binding, I know that's not in this set, but that's a 6 mana spell, but you only cost one. You only played it for one. That counts as one, not six. Whereas a lot of things care about mana value.
Or an X spell would give you more, not just the
Yes,
one, right? Which is
yes.
the cost of the card. So it's good in some ways and bad in others. As far as that goes. That is the end of the new mechanics that you guys will be seeing for the first time in Bloomburrow. For those of you guys who are maybe newer to the game, we also wanted to go over some returning mechanics that you might not be as familiar with, just because they don't exist in every set, but they do sort of come back from time to time. And the first one is going to be classes. We got this in the first D&D set. They work similar to sagas. The only difference is that you have to like put mana into leveling them up. So when you play them, you automatically get whatever this first ability is, and then you can pay 2 mana to hit level 2. We usually just denote that with a dice, and then you can pay 4 more, and then you are forever on number 3 here. So it is exactly like it sounds, like a class leveling structure where you get more abilities as you level.
The biggest thing I think to note is that when you go to level 2, you still keep your level 1 ability. You're not replacing it, it's additive.
It's like the first one's sort of like a planeswalker static ability, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is kind of neat. The same thing is true for 2 to 3.
Yes, you always keep. You're just when you spend more mana to move up a level, you are just getting a new ability on top of what you already have.
They're pretty straightforward. They are enchantments, so they can be destroyed the same way. They're not like tokens of any kind. So, keep an eye out for maybe wanting to put some enchantment removal in your sideboards when possible, because these I think are going to be quite powerful. If I remember from the D&D set, like Wizards class and like even the life gain Paladin class one was quite strong.
Right, Ranger class was really good.
Oh, that one was insane standard playable.
Yep.
So good. All right. Moving on, the next mechanic that we're going to talk about is prowess. It has seen a little bit of a comeback more recently, so you guys are probably familiar with it. It hasn't been around for a bit, but then we've started to see it a lot in the last few sets. And basically, it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It triggers multiple times. So the threat of activation here is you attack with a 3/4 into their 4/4 with mana open. They can't block you, right? Because then you could cast draw 2 or shock them in the face or whatever the case may be, and you eat their creature. So the threat of activation is really cool. It's a tricky spell and also leads to some really explosive turns. There's some prowess type mechanics in standard right now that are a menace. They don't have menace, but it's a menace.
It's a really scary combat math mechanic because, like you said, if you're attacking at 4/4, not only could you shock them in the face, you could shock one of their other creatures, and now you've got the 2-for-1 out of a 1 mana removal spell because now you're 4/5/8, they're 4/4. Like it's a really scary thing to block.
Once upon a time, Swiftspear used to be $5. Yeah,
yep.
That card's
yep.
good.
When Prowess first came out in cons, that was a real thing.
And Swiftspear was just like a thing in top tier decks for years. I mean, it's still seeing play, so
still is, yeah.
Pretty straightforward. We've seen it before. So moving on, this same card has another returning mechanic, which we first saw in Yanks will know better than me, the spooky set.
I think we first saw it. It was the Dimir mechanic in. I never remember which is which, Ravnica Allegiance or Guilds of Ravnica.
Oh, I think it was Guilds.
Yeah,
I remember Dimir being all the spooky stuff, like the horrors and stuff.
Yes, yeah, it was in one of those two. Their set symbols are so similar, I always get them mixed up. But
So basically what it is you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put them in the graveyard or on top in any order. So it's like, I was gonna say it's like Surveil. It's like Scry, but instead of going to the bottom of your library, it goes to your graveyard, which is cool for cards like Forage, and it makes for some really unique play styles and allows them to incorporate more graveyard synergies and stuff like that. So overall, I think it's an upgrade mechanic, but similar.
Outside of some, like if you had a deck with a bunch of tutors or some sort of shuffle effects, you're pretty much always going to be better off with something in your graveyard than at the bottom of your library.
Yeah. Unless the set is going super long and you mill yourself, because I've been doing that sometimes. Let's keep it moving along. The next one is Threshold. From when I first started playing Magic, Threshold was a big thing. My first mono white deck had a lot of Threshold in it. So Threshold just says whenever you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you get whatever the ability is. Sometimes it's a static ability, sometimes it's an activated ability. You can only activate if you have the 7 cards. You'll see this in a lot of different ways. Maybe your instant or sorcery will do something more if you have Threshold, something like that. Kind of a nombo with cards like Forage, so we expect to see those in sort of different overlapping color schemes. But again, benefits self-mill.
And it's good with Surveil, which we just saw, because that fills up your graveyard. This is back from when you first started. You get quizzed. What set did this come out in?
I don't know what it came out in. I'm going to say Judgment.
It was Odyssey, which is the first, which
Odyssey.
is Onslaught was that block. It was present in both Odyssey block and Onslaught block, I believe.
I think I have to look at the set symbol. Which is the one that has the ball with like this, like I think it's supposed to be like an mesmeric orb or something. The set symbol. It's got like a ball with like the stand.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I know what. Oh no, that's like Conspiracy?
No, it's old.
Odyssey was like a little metal, like I don't know what to call it, like a little totem almost.
I'm gonna leave all of this in. Chat can watch me scroll furiously.
Judgment was the scales. Torment was like the little circle.
It was Odyssey.
Kind of. Oh, that was.
That's a specific card. It's supposed to be like this orb that's on a little pedestal thing, whatever. That's the set I was thinking, because I remember my deck had a lot of Odyssey in it, so I was just guessing. I started around 7th edition, so the cards I remember buying first was Invasion, Plane Shift, and then 7th. I remember 7th edition coming out. Everybody was like excited about the stupid free foil elemental that you got.
Yeah, I always forget that Odyssey symbol is the Mirari on there, because when it's on a card, it's so small it looks kind of almost like rectangular.
So I just remember my mono white deck had a lot of that symbol, so that's why I guessed it. But you said it came out when? Invasion?
That was Odyssey. No, Odyssey is when it came out.
Okay, cool. So so that was right. Yay. Yep. But yeah, I started during, I guess, Plane Shift, which makes sense because the very first pack I opened had a Draco, which is Plane Shift.
Yep.
So that was like the very first pack I opened, I was very excited about.
Invasion, Plane Shift, Apocalypse. 7th was around there, and then Odyssey was right after Apocalypse.
And then I did buy a lot of Invasion because like those two things weren't that far apart. But anyway, we have rambled long enough. Let's keep it going here. We've gone over Threshold. The next one is going to be Landfall. This is something that comes back pretty frequently and is very common to you Commander players. You guys will know this card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, do a thing. In this case, you get to deal 1 damage to target opponent. Sometimes you'll get target creature gets +2/+2. You'll get whatever. But the general premise is that whenever a land ETBs, you get this trigger. So if you have sort of an Involving Wilds mechanic, you can get that trigger twice per turn, or sometimes when landfall happens in a set, they'll let you destroy land, search a land, things like that. So be on the lookout for things that will allow you to abuse that.
Straightforward mechanic. Not too much to go over there.
Yep. Moving on, Changeling is the last one. This one is a shapeshifter. It just means this card is every creature type. So that'll be super relevant when we get down to the draftable archetypes, because as you'll see in just a second, they are pretty dependent on creature type, which is interesting because we don't normally see that. Here we will have two different archetypes within the same one, and Changeling is going to come in really, really handy.
Mark Rosewater has talked about Wizards liking to use Changeling whenever there's a set that's very heavy typal because it helps bridge the gap between different creature types. You can play them in multiple decks. It's nice, and like if you end up with a 3-color and that's using 2 different types, it fits in both. You saw that in like Lorwyn block was very heavy typal, and they used that's where shapeshifters originated.
Yep. So next up, we will be going over the draftable archetypes. We're going to go over all 10 of the color pairings, and we're going to show you guys the common or the uncommon and the rare signpost, which we don't normally do, but we wanted to because they each are very specific to a thing. You'll see that the uncommon leads you to the mechanic that these colors are trying to support, and then you will see that the rare is leading you to the creature type that these colors are supporting. Interesting. I'm really excited about it.
A lot of times the color pairs have a rare sort of signpost, but they're not consistent into what they do between the pairs, so we don't always show it. And sometimes they're not that indicative of what's going on. But here they made a conscious effort to make them all specifically about those creature types. So we thought it was cool to show.
All right, so let's go ahead and first talk about the Plume-Creed Mentor. Again, we're not going to rate these cards. We're just going to go over them to talk about what the colors are trying to do. We will rate them in our set review portion. When the Mentor or another creature you control with flying enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control without flying. So the general premise and what you're going to see these color pairings want to do is have creatures with flying help creatures without that flying. So they will sort of work together. You will get benefits for having high volumes of kind of both, which is interesting, but you're going to want a ton of these birds. It's going to help all your squirrels, token 1/1s, things like that.
Azorius has always typically been your blue-white flyers archetype, and so it's nice to see that they're just trying to do something that keeps the spirit of that color pair, but it's a little different. It's trying to also benefit your ground creatures.
Yeah, I think you'll want a lot more birds and things that fly, but then having some will give you some really cool benefits. So it's a neat building restriction, kind of, if that makes sense. To get the benefit you need to have non-flyers, but to capitalize on it, you need to have mostly flyers. I love it. It's going to be great.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the rare here. It is a legendary bird scout. This is whenever one or more board you control deals combat damage to a player, choose one of the following. Not really relevant until we get to the ratings, but again, it's telling you that these color pairings are going to be focusing very heavily on birds. And that's what we saw in the last Mentor, which is the uncommon. It is a bird scout as well. So you're going to have a ton of these sort of very, very heavily armored bird themed decks, and it's going to be so good. Look at them all. They're so cute.
I don't think we ever explicitly said it, but just for everyone, the 10 archetypes, there are 10 creature types that are heavily supported. In the set, each pair gets its own. In this case, it's birds. And most of them, if you think about it for a second, you could probably guess what a lot of the creature types are. Not all of them, but you can guess some of them.
All right, so we got birds that help non-birds. For Azorius. Next up, we've got the Rat Wizard for blue-black. It's a threshold card, so it'll also tell you that that's the mechanic that this will focus on. When it enters, if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So this is an interesting one. I don't like when the threshold is an ETB on a creature, personally, just because it makes it so you don't want to play your 3/3 for 3 with Menace on turn 3, because that's a really strong ability. Like, this is a good creature. I want to play it on 3 if I can, but you don't necessarily get punished too badly if you don't. So we're looking at Threshold as the main mechanic, which works with Surveil.
Exactly. It's good for blue-black in that sense. I don't mind sometimes Threshold being on ETBs, just because it can sometimes it basically turns it into a split card. It's a 3 mana. It's a turn 3 mana 3/3 menace, which is still pretty good. Or it's a 3 mana 3/3 menace later in the game that's a mana war. Or actually better because it's not land permanent.
Yeah, it's certainly much better than drawing any other 3-drop on it late in the game. But then the threshold is not as beneficial unless there's like some graveyard recursion stuff that could be really cool.
Sure.
The other thing that's neat about this mechanic being specialized in these colors is that they often have more like draw spells, removal spells. So you tend to like fill up your graveyard on your own more, even without Surveil. So I think it's a very fitting mechanic. Our last creature was a rat wizard, and our rat rare is a rat rogue. That says at the beginning of each end step, create X rat creature tokens. What is X? Where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So you're going to get some benefits for making trades in combat, for removing their stuff. Rats.
I like this. I mean, again, we're not rating the cards here, but rats are kind of sneaky, doing stuff in the graveyard, and hosing your opponent's graveyard in the process. That's pretty cool.
Do the rats exile the creatures because they consumed them and there's nothing to go into the graveyard?
We'll go with that.
Dun dun dun. All right, now we have the Rakdos theme, which is a lizard warlock. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You can choose one of them until end of turn. You may play that card. So if an opponent lost life, so this is combat oriented, so you can like draw some extra cards. Not draw, but like get card advantage through what is this called again? Impulse.
Impulse. Yeah.
Impulse drawing is what we call this. Is impulse drawing the mechanic here?
No, it's really focused on the opponents losing life this turn. It's playing in the old Rakdos like Bloodthirst space, where if they've taken damage, or Spectacle, like if they've taken damage this turn, then you get a benefit.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm surprised we don't see like the return of like a light Spectacle type theme. That'd be kind of cute. But okay, so we care a lot about making our opponents take some damage. Let's take a look at the rare signpost. Ward, pay 2 life. Other creatures you control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter for each opponent who has lost life this turn. So in limited, that'll always be 1. Whenever you cast a lizard spell, this will deal 1 damage to an opponent. So if you cast a lizard, it automatically will trigger. That's neat.
Yep. Yeah, it's a nice little self-sustaining combo there.
So yeah, every lizard comes into play with an additional 1/1 counter. Plus, you're just going to kill your opponents over time.
All for the low price of 2 mana.
The low price of having cute lizards. I love it so much. I can't wait. I never want to leave this set ever again. I'm going to buy so many boxes and just put them on my shelves so we can play forever. Next up, we have the Wonder Tail Mentor. This is actually in the precon. Muldhound used this. It's 2 mana for a 2/2 that can tap for any Gruul color land. And whenever you expend 4, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto the mentor, so it just gets bigger over time. And so we're going to be looking at this expend mechanic.
Rule here is utilizing expend, and it's kind of also a ramp archetype. I like that this is a sort of mana dork that, bigger because it's a 2/2, but that also just gets bigger over time, so it's not completely dead. A lot of times you've got that 1/1 sitting there that kind of doesn't do anything anymore on like turn 6, but
yeah, this thing became a 6/6 in our game. It was a commander game, but yeah, it got real big. A 2/2 for 2 that can make both your colors is going to be great. Yeah. The rare card at the beginning of your first main phase, you get to add some mana, which will help you with those expend. Whenever you expend 4, you get to gain some life, and you get free mana to make sure you can do it. Whenever you expand 8, exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play one of those. So you get to impulse, and you get extra mana to do it, and you get to gain some life. So really, really focusing in on those expend mechanics.
You're definitely your big mana deck of the format.
Yeah. Which isn't Simic for a change.
Yeah.
This is probably the first not cute one.
And it's the rabbit of all things. You'd think the rabbit would be cute.
Yeah, he's not so cute. But that's okay.
Big pointy teeth.
Yeah, he looks like the bad guy from Harry Potter. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, is he the rat?
Voldemort?
No, not Voldemort.
Peter Pettigrew. Peter Pettigrew.
He reminds me of...
Yeah.
Borrow Guard Mentor, an XX Trampler. His power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. Go wide in bunnies, because bunnies have a lot of babies, so that's very
Yep.
funny. I get it. Someone put some thought into that. Not a ton, but some.
So,
Next up, we've got the rare reach and vigilance. Whenever the archer attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that is a token or a rabbit. If a creature you control has total power greater 10 or greater, you get to draw. If creatures, wow, yeah, that's a big benefit. Holy crap.
I like the fact that it's an archer. It's just gonna make me want to just go, it's wabbit season every time I see this card.
This card is neat. It's very snowbally, but it says put a counter on each other creature. So, like, it can't attack a ton, but its ability is very high impact if you can make, like, a clean lane for it. Yeah, benefits you for having rabbits. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, these common and or uncommon and rare pairs aren't, like, breaking any formats or anything. Or breaking any, like, molds. Oh, yeah! Let's go, Orzhov! We're going to be looking at bats. This one is flying vigilant to the beginning of your end step. If you gained or lost life this turn, each opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. So this is focusing on personal life gain and life loss, both things that are really common to these colors. It's interesting. Normally it's one or the other. The fact that this will trigger on both is really cool. So we expect to see, like, the black card draw, which allows you to, like, lose 3 when you do it. Something like that.
I feel like we went through a few sets in a row where they tried to make the life gain deck work, and it just was never consistent enough. So now they're taking a shot at life gain or loss.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because we had so many sets where I feel like the life gain deck was nuts and it was very good. And so, like, they always had this, like, 1 or 2 life gain cards in a set, but I never felt like the recent sets have wanted to make a life gain deck work. It always felt like it was not supported enough to do anything. And I felt like that was just like the pendulum swing, because we had so many sets where that's always what they were doing.
That makes sense. I don't know if it's just that they want to do something different, or I don't know. It's kind of cool. It feels more black-white than just life gain.
Yeah. And maybe the pendulum is swinging the other way. But I will say a lot of the black-white cards, sometimes they'll work together, where it's like whenever you attack, you gain life. And then there's another sister card that says whenever you gain life, your opponent takes life or something.
Yes.
So, like, that has been pretty common. However, seeing it on the same card is pretty unique. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that does that.
Yeah, me neither.
All right. So now the rare one is going to care about bats, I assume. Whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain a life. So they help each other. And then whenever this enters or attacks, you may pay this and 2 life. So it's going to trigger your signpost really, really well when you do return target non-land permanent with mana value with a finality counter. Cool. So we want bats. I'm going to definitely make that commander. Now we have probably, won't be the cutest, but otters are pretty darn cute. We're going to look at the Stormcatch Mentor. Has prowess. That's going to be the mechanic we're focusing on. And it's a 1/1 with haste. Instant and sorceries cost less to cast. So we're looking at instants and sorceries with prowess. Good pairing.
Your typical is it spells matter.
And otters is the perfect creature type for this. God, I just love this set so much. The rare says whenever you cast a spell, if it's your first instant or sorcery spell, or your first otter spell, other than this, you've cast this turn, you may have target opponent draw a card. If you do, copy that spell. Huh. And choose new targets. So it kind of has like built-in gift.
Yeah. I kind of like it. It's the fact that it's a May is critical, because you don't want to give them a card if you're casting a 2/2 and you get another 2/2, but something good you do.
Yeah. I also like that this is an interesting thing. It says your first otter spell other than this. So it specifically is worded in a way to where it won't punish you for casting this and then casting another spell.
Yes.
Whereas I feel like they could have just left that off, and most of the time they would have.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because they don't want you doing, like, usually they don't want you doing the big explosive thing like this, then following it up with another thing. They want your opponent to have a turn to react for balancing purposes. So it's interesting that they chose to add an extra line of text to fix that for the player. So
as well as the fact that it can trigger off of your first instant, your first sorcery, and your first honor. Like, you can trigger 3 times in a turn.
yeah, this is your first instant, the first sorcery spell, or the first otter. Interesting. I assumed it was one or the other, but
I
you're
did too
right.
until I went and looked it up in the release notes.
Huh. Okay, when I read that, I assumed. So we care about otters, we care about casting spells, instants, and sorceries. Let's move on to Golgari. Squirrels! Yes, my squirrel decks as a child, they're going to come back to life. A 3-2 when the Vine Reap Mentor enters or dies, create a food token. So we care about foods. And then our rare cares about squirrels. Menace. Other squirrels you control have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, create a squirrel token. And you can pay 2 to forage, which is the mechanic that we care about here. Oh, it's interesting. The signpost didn't really have forage, which I would have thought. It kind of helps with forage because it creates food, and forage allows you to get to sack foods instead of your graveyards. But we were seeing the mechanic on all of the uncommons, but here we're seeing all of it on the rare. Put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel if you play 2, sacrifice a food. That's neat.
The signpost here is much more of an enabler than a payoff, it feels like.
Yeah. The other ones, like for the bird, the Azorius bird, like that's huge payoff. Whereas like this might be the weakest one depending on how much other food synergy there is in the set. Because if it's enabling a ton of cards, then great. If like it's enabling this rare, then not so great.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll get to that when we review the set. Next up, we have Boros. We got Mouse Soldier, Vigilant, and Haste, and it has Valiant. So that's the thing we're going to care about, the sort of heroic mechanic, targeting it with spells and abilities. And then the rare says other mice get +1/+1. And then let's see if the rest of it has anything to do with it. When it enters the battlefield, create a Crag Flame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token with equip. Creature gets +1/+1, has vigilance, trample, haste, and equipment. Interesting. So it creates the weapon that can target the creatures with Valiant. So you can move that equipment around a bunch, triggering all your Valiants.
Exactly.
Moving an equipment is an ability that you are targeting that creature with.
And anybody that's playing Modern right now sure knows that with Nadu.
That's interesting. Huh. That's really cool. I like the set design here. Yeah, okay. And the final one here is Simic. Always insane in constructed, usually very sad in limited. We have a Frog Druid, perfect for Simic. That makes a lot of sense. Reach, exile another target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter. Activate only as a sorcery. So some blink mechanics. The rare, the Worrywart. Frog Druid, Vigilant 3/3. Enters the battlefield, or another creature you control enter the battlefield. Return up to target creature you control with lesser mana to its owner's hand. So you get to bounce a creature. So we just care about bouncing stuff in this set, I guess?
The Simic archetype, from what I've been able to tell, is it's like bounce, flicker, and then abusing ETBs and leave the battlefield effects.
I was thinking maybe it was like also abusing like Offspring, but Offspring is mostly not in these colors. There's some in blue, but not a ton. Frogs you control have tap, add mana, so Simic doing some rampy stuff makes sense. I'll have to check out what the flicker interests are, but as face value, assuming the set's like very similar to other sets as far as like what the cards are doing, I'm not as excited about this mechanic.
It definitely needs a lot more support than some of the other ones. I do like that they're trying something different with Simic. I mean, yeah, it's still a bit big mana, but it's more big mana to play repeated spells as opposed to trying to ramp to just one giant thing.
Yeah, it looked like the Gruul list was a little bit more big bigger stuff, which usually it's like the big stuff and it's like heavy beats. So it's more like medium 4/4s with heavy beats, whereas like this is like 8/8s for Simic. It looks like those two rolls are going to be a little bit more reversed. And this is going to take that like Azorius flicker mechanic.
Yeah, so I like that they're trying something. We'll see if it works, but it's definitely different than what we've seen with Simic in recent memory.
Yeah. All right, Yanks, what are you the most excited for? Simic frogs, Boros mice, Golgari squirrels, Is It otters, love it, Orzhov bats, Selesnya rabbits, raccoons for Gruul, lizards for Rakdos, Dimir rats, and finally Azorius birds.
I don't know. There's a few. I mean, I'm always curious to see how those Is It spells decks pan out. So that could be good. I like the idea of Azorius, the helping non-flyers, is kind of interesting.
I love Azorius Flyers decks. I really like the bird mechanics here. I'm most excited. It's gonna sound super obvious because Orzhov. I'm always Orzhov girly for sure. But the fact that it's bats and not like, you know, the classic like vampires and clerics and yada yada yada, I think the creature type really speaks to me. I'm excited about that. Obviously squirrels. I'm just gonna list them all. Never mind. I'll just stop now.
except for the rabbit that wasn't cute.
Well, the rest of the rabbits are gonna be cute. I'm sure it's fine. It's just that one. Overall, I'm gonna go with bats because that's kind of unique.
It is. We have not seen a bat typal theme before.
All right.
And I like what they're doing with the gain and lost life.
Yes, absolutely. For those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, I hope you guys enjoyed our introduction. This one was a little bit longer. We had twice as many cards to go over, a lot of new mechanics. So I hope you guys leave me a comment down below. Let us know what you think of these draftable archetypes and Bloomburrow as a set. If you guys would like to check out our set review, they will be coming out every single day this week. By the time you're watching this, they're probably already out. So please go check out those set reviews. And don't forget to click the links down below in the description to check out our sponsors that make all of this possible. That's going to be Cool Stuff, Mtgnerdgirl, Anthros, and all of those links and discount codes are down below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. You ready for White Yanks?
Yep, certainly am.
Bye, guys.